I remember the profound, nauseating cold of that night, not the temperature of the air, but the paralyzing chill of absolute uncertainty that clung to every soul in that cramped, underground headquarters. I could smell the stale coffee and the damp wool of the uniforms, the briny mist of the channel seeping into the stone walls around us, yet the air was thickest with unsaid prayers and the metallic tang of fear. I was there watching the faces of men who held the entire weight of Western civilization in their hands, knowing that in just a few hours, the greatest invasion in history would either crack open Fortress Europe or shatter into a million pieces on the Atlantic tide. We were staring at the charts, I and the rest of the silent, terrified staff, as the weather reports slammed down onto the table like hammer blows. The initial window was gone. Gale force winds, crushing waves. Delay meant postponing Operation Overlord, risking the exposure of our massive, beautiful, secret fleets. The thousands of aircraft, the meticulous deception, all laid bare. It meant giving Hitler the gift of time. But to go ahead meant condemning men to an open sea landing in conditions no planner could reasonably approve. And there, at the center of that silent maelstrom, was Eisenhower. I saw the dark circles beneath his eyes. The almost unbearable loneliness of a man who knew he alone would sign the orders that would send tens of thousands to their possible end. His simple forward question still echoes in my mind. When can we go? It was not merely the weather that threatened us, though. The deepest, most dangerous risk of failure was not out there on the rolling waves, but right here, in the closed room, a silent war of egos and strategies being waged by the very men tasked with securing the victory. I knew the plan was fragile, built on the shifting sand of forced cooperation. We had Montgomery brilliant, arrogant, utterly convinced that his meticulous, concentrated, and rather slow approach was the only path to success. And we had the American High Command, pushing, always pushing, for speed, for a massive broad front advance the moment the beaches were taken. The conflict was fundamental. The British desire for a methodical, calculated, break-dash in asterisk, versus the American demand for a rapid, overwhelming break-dash out asterisk. I saw the papers crossing Eisenhower's desk, the barely veiled criticisms, the psychological tension that threatened to tear the whole alliance apart before the first boot even touched the sand of Normandy. The plan itself, which I had spent months reviewing, was a tyranny of logistics. To seize and hold a shallow beachhead, and then, immediately, to use the British beach's gold, Juno sword as the anchor for a swift, concentrated push inland by Montgomery's 21st Army Group, while the American, the 5th, and the 7th Corps, Omaha and Utah, secured the flanks and seized the critical port of Cherbourg. But the initial success, the very feasibility of the entire operation, hinged on one single, critical factor: getting off those bloody beaches quickly and establishing defensible positions. I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach as I considered the optimism built into the timetable, and optimism based on an assumption of German disorientation that I, privately, never truly shared. Then came the signal. June 6, 6:30, HRU. I was in the command bunker, watching the first reports filter back from the most critical, most feared sector, Omaha Beach. The code names meant nothing to the world, but to me, they were a promise and a terror. The initial reports were confused, then sparse, then terrifyingly blunt. The air bombardment had missed its targets, the tide was higher than expected. The German defense was not the half-trained garrison we had hoped for, but a veteran, full-strength division dug in on the bluffs, untouched by the preliminary fire. I felt the silence in the room deepen, becoming a physical, crushing weight. The narrative of failure unfolded in agonizing slow motion. Tanks, intended to shield the first waves, drowning in the rough surf. Landing craft destroyed, men pinned down by a murderous, interlocking fire that raked the entire shore. I could almost hear the whistle of the machine gun fire echoing thousands of miles away. The reports began to use words we all dreaded. Stalled, heavy casualties, no movement inland. The beach became a catastrophic bottleneck, the bodies of the dead and wounded piling up, making the arrival of successive waves a logistical and human impossibility. I looked at the vast, colored map, the red arrows meant to symbolize unstoppable progress, and saw them instead simply bleeding out onto the sand. The entire western flank of the invasion was collapsing. That was the moment the leadership conflict almost brought us down. I saw the panic, suppressed and contained, yet vibrating through the staff. The immediate strategic question was whether to divert the following waves to send reinforcements intended for Omaha onto the relative success of Utah or the British sectors. To do so would have meant abandoning the 5th Corps to its fate, sacrificing the entire American flank and crippling the crucial objective of Cherbourg. It would have meant effectively giving up on the plan and accepting the German defensive line as the new reality. It would have been a catastrophic admission of defeat, a failure of nerve that would have had consequences not just for the war, but for the very possibility of the Allied coalition remaining intact. I watched Eisenhower, his face a mask of iron, walk into his private office, and moments later, emerge with a small, single sheet of paper. I knew what it was. It was his confession, his note prepared in advance, taking full and sole responsibility for the failure of the invasion. Our landings in the Cherbourg Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold. I recall the frantic scrawl of his handwriting, the texture of the paper, a profound, almost philosophical acknowledgement of the abyss. This man, the one who bore the ultimate responsibility for unity, for the fragile alliance, was preparing to sacrifice his career to save the coalition from imploding under the weight of recrimination. But then, the reports changed. Not because of a brilliant new order from a distant general, but because of the sheer bloody-minded, localized courage of the lowest ranks. I heard the voice of a young colonel, his report crackling over the radio, refusing to accept the defeat. They are murdering us here, but we are going to move. We are going to attack. Naval destroyers, in a stunning act of defiance and risk, steamed straight into the shallow waters, risking grounding and shelling, to bring their massive guns to bear directly on the German pillboxes. I remember the sound of the staff room when the code phrase finally came. The men were off the beach, tiny bands of shock troopers, climbing the bluffs, blowing the wire, taking the fight inland. They had purchased a foothold with sheer, brutal sacrifice, every inch bought with human flesh. The Allies did not fail on D-Day, but I know, perhaps better than anyone, how close we came. The true miracle was not the crossing of the channel. It was the psychological, fragile crossing of the internal gulf between the leaders, between strategy and ego, between caution and ambition. We never speak of the near collapse of the command structure, only of the glorious victory. But I saw the note, I felt the tension. I heard the hesitation in the voices of men who knew, for one heart-stopping moment, that they had risked everything and were about to lose it all. The beaches were secured by nightfall, not by perfect planning, but by an insane, elemental refusal to die in vain. And when the quiet finally returned, a silence broken only by the sound of waves washing against the sand and the distant, constant rumble of artillery inland, I remember looking out at the faint line of the horizon, stained red, and feeling not triumph, but a terrible, profound exhaustion. We had not merely won a battle, we had passed a test of the soul. That victory, I realized then, would forever be measured not by the miles gained on the map, but by the unseen ledger of despair, and the quiet, stubborn honor of those who simply refused to break. I still hear the whispers of that night, even now.